Good morning, everyone. I think this is going to be quick and easy. I don't see anybody here from the sign community, so I'm wondering if they forgot. No? Okay, good. Well, Erica's got it covered then. So we'll just start with introductions. Erica, do you want to lead us off?
Sure, I'm Erica McConnell. I'm the current planning manager.
Tim Steele, Assembly.
Bill Evans.
John Weddleton.
Amy Domboski?
Tony Cage.
Chris Schutte, I'm the Director of Economic and Community Development for the municipality.
Pete Peterson, Assembly.
Tyler Robinson, Planning and Zoning.
Welcome. Good morning.
Hi, Amy. Steve Heimel, I'm a citizen of Skinard.
Welcome, Steve. It's good to see you here this morning.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to start first with the agenda. Are there any comments? Oh, and our Vice Chair, Assemblymember Gray Jackson is here as well. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So we're going to start with our agenda. Are there any modifications, anything that we need to add to the agenda before we get started? All right, seeing none, are there any Assemblymember comments before we start? Okay, so I will just, let me see, okay, we'll get that on the agenda. Okay, so we'll just start then. The first thing that was, oh, Mr. O'Day, good morning. So the other thing we will start with is AO 2015-83. Today was intended to be a work session between everybody essentially and the sign community. And Erica's smiling, so I'll let her give us the update. I'm assuming
Go right ahead.
Chris.
Sure. So Chris and I and our zoning plan reviewers who do the sign reviews at the counter spent, well, so first of all, I worked on a proposal with the zoning plan reviewers, which we then took to the representatives of the sign industry. We spent 2 hours with them yesterday discussing this, and we came to tentative agreement on the proposal, but we request more time to do testing. They have committed to providing us with several examples of the signs that they are most proud of and want to make sure fit within this new proposal. And so they're going to get those to us by the end of next week. We're going to take about a week to review them based against the new proposal to make sure that there aren't any unintended consequences, because the last thing we want to do is pass new legislation and then find out it's problematic and have to fix it again.
Sure.
So we are requesting additional time to go through that process before we bring the proposal back to this committee to say, this is what we're comfortable with and we've all agreed upon.
You know, I just want to start by saying, you know, I so appreciate this collaborative relationship and the ability to talk to everyone and really get input and come at it with, you know, open arms kind of. You know, I think it's something that we've always seen we can improve on in government, right? So I really appreciate it. So Erica, just to be clear, there was a little discussion at the last assembly meeting whether we should have just let the last one die and bring back a new one. I'm still working under the assumption you're working with the last ordinance that went through planning and zoning, or do you want a whole new one to come forward?
So the title of the last ordinance says that it eliminates the architectural feature provision. So I don't think we can keep the architectural feature provision under that title. So I think we need to have a new one.
Okay.
The other benefit of having a new one is that Assemblymember Johnston had brought forth a separate sign proposal relating to a totally different subject regarding signs that the commission has reviewed and made a recommendation on, and she actually contacted me and said, why wasn't it wrapped in with the other ordinance? And we said, well,
Sure.
we don't change ordinances that you sent to us. And she said, oh, well, you could have just talked to me. And so I'd like to wrap in the commission's recommendation of her proposal, and then we have one other minor sign issue we'd like to wrap in as well. So I think if it's acceptable, we'll be kind of having a new ordinance, but I'm not sure that it would need to be sent back to the commission since the commission has looked at the two big issues.
Okay,
That would be up to the
So I'm
assembly.
going to have to tell Assemblymember Flynn he was right. It's going to be bitter coming out of my mouth, but
I don't want him on the record.
right. Okay, so then I think we had that scheduled to come back before the assembly at the next meeting, wasn't it? So then it'll be the recommendation of the committee to postpone that indefinitely. Is there agreement throughout? Okay, so we'll do that, and we look forward to you know, that new ordinance coming forward. It should be. I love seeing things get done, so this is very exciting for me. Are there any questions or comments regarding the sign ordinance at all? No. questions or comments from the public? No? Okay, wonderful. All right, I think this is gonna be a quick meeting, to be honest, I'm pretty excited. So, we'll move on to number 4. Mr. Trini, do you have and Chair Trini has joined us as well. So marijuana land use. So Erica, I know we went through this at the marijuana committee. I don't anticipate much has changed at this point because I haven't seen anything, but you want to just give us an update?
Yeah, I'm still, I've worked with Amanda Moser in the clerk's office about looking at topics addressed in other example ordinances, primarily from Colorado, in other, in their municipalities, and we've discussed issues, assuming we're moving forward with the dual licensing scheme, which everybody seems to be on board with, we've discussed issues that should be handled through the licensing part and issues that should be handled through the land use approval part. We are working hard to make a, and again, this is just us working together. None of this has been vetted or approved by anybody else, so I'm just throwing out ideas here, but we are trying to create a system where an applicant can apply once at the clerk's office, and then it would get the land use portion would get routed to the department for our processing, but where they wouldn't have to go downtown, apply at the clerk's office, and then come out here and also apply here. So we're working on exciting and creative ways to make things more efficient. If that, I don't know if people are gonna, I don't know if, I haven't checked in with anybody about that, but, so we're still working on it. I know it needs to be done and out soon. It's, just
So,
trying to.
what are your thoughts? I know it almost seemed at the marijuana committee you were a little uneasy even letting out your rough draft.
Mostly because nobody had looked at it.
Right.
So I hadn't run it through my supervisor,
Right.
the administration had not seen it. So the ideas had not been vetted and accepted by the people, the ordinance is being put forward by the administration. So that was I wasn't uncomfortable with anything that I'd put in it, I was just uncomfortable because I was throwing out something that nobody had looked at. The way it seems, the things that I'm hearing is that, your retail stores and your grow operations and your production facilities, I think the assembly will want to be issuing approvals for those in the same way they do for alcohol. That sounds like what I'm hearing. I would make the argument that testing facilities probably don't need to come to the assembly, but that may not be, what everyone else agrees with. But so that's kind of what I'm writing it to say, but again, nobody has given the stamp of approval, so that's
Mr.
where my-
Trini, I think had a question.
Erica, interested in Colorado's experience with the power demands of facilities. I want to make sure that when we're figuring land usage, that we understand the ability of MEA or MLNP to meet the power demands.
So what I've written in there, and this would only apply to grow facilities, is that they would need to provide with their application a letter from the appropriate electric utility stating that the situation, the power provided to the site is sufficient to meet the needs of the operation.
Because we had an issue with a electrical demand out of Birchwood that MEA was not able to meet at that time. They wanted 3-phase power coming in, they didn't have available.
Right.
So whatever phase power a grow operation is going to need, and the processing, I want to make sure we have that power available.
Right, and I don't think I want to put the power standards in the code because A, I don't really understand that stuff, and B, it could change, but if they provide a letter from the electric utility saying that everything's okay, to me, that should be sufficient for our needs.
That's
So
fine.
that's kind of how I propose to handle
And
that.
as you guys are figuring out the demands, could you figure out the staff demands too? Because as these licenses come through, there's going to be more demand from you guys. And I've asked Amanda to do that because I want to figure out what we have to plus up to make this thing work. Because we don't want all these applications lingering because we don't have the staff to process them. Thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Chris.
This may not be a question you can answer. At one of the marijuana regulation meetings, somebody brought up the topic of how many positions, for example, Denver brought on to deal with the licensing and the building permit. Do you recall what that was?
37 and a half
37.5, okay.
for a community that was about twice the size.
Do you remember what the breakdown was of those 37.5 employees?
It was
Okay.
all split up. I mean, some in fire and some in zoning
Okay.
and some in the treasury, tax collection. I mean, yeah, it was
Right.
all across the board. And a couple people in the mayor's office, policy people.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Just
But I
curious.
think I should be able to find that information.
It'd be interesting to know from the land use perspective, how many people they brought on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pete?
Thanks, Madam Chair. And as far as the electrical power situation, you know, I think it's advantageous if we are able to spread out the grow areas and have them not just be in industrial zones, because the smaller operations that are already out there are using electricity off the grid right now. And so, you know, if we zone this so that people can only grow in industrially zoned areas, then the electrical companies are probably going to have to run some additional power into those areas. So I think it's right now it's spread out all over the municipality, and it's not centralized. And I actually think that's better than having it all in you know, industrialized zoned areas. Plus, we are going to need those industrialized zoned areas for other industries in the future. You know, I don't think we want to use up all that land for marijuana grow operations. Just my opinion.
Any other comments? All right, so when it comes to this committee and looking at the land use and the zoning to be discussed, what are the recommendations for the path forward? Is it just wait till the administration comes out with their version? Or I know he brings up a good point about really having a robust discussion about, you know, up until this point, I've pretty much heard almost unilaterally that industrial zones is where people were assuming these grow operations were going to go. But if that's not the case, you know, I'm just not sure. What do you guys think is the best path to discuss it? Because yes, the marijuana committee is looking at this issue. They looked at the draft. This committee that looks at land use and economic development hasn't had the opportunity to look at it. So, thoughts, comments?
It seems to me it's just looking at the zoning code and seeing where the conflicts might arise based upon the various operations. And you can take a most restrictive approach or a least restrictive approach in terms of scale or size. And one of the things that they have to submit with their application would be what their power demand would be. And then we see whether or not it's available or not. And if it's not, they either can't do it there, or they have to scale back, or they'd have to bring the power in, or pay for it. So.
Mr. Evans and Mr. Gray Jackson.
Yeah, I haven't given it much thought. I kind of assumed that the marijuana committee's taking care of all the details and I wouldn't have to worry about it.
No,
Just-
you assumed wrong. You know what
Yeah,
they say about assuming.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think there's certainly, I guess, a policy decision or several policy decisions that probably need to be made. You know, I'm perfectly willing to wait and see what the administration does, or I'm perfectly happy with the assembly moving forward with what it thinks should happen. But issues such as, you know, that Pete touches on is, you know, whether or not, I mean, the size of these grow operations is really the key as far as where they're located at, and whether we're going to limit, I mean, are we going to open the door for, you know, big marijuana industry to come in? I don't think we have to necessarily. We can limit the size of grow operations and kind of sort of take a more family farm kind of approach to those kind of things. But I think we have to make those big decisions about what we're going to allow in the city as far as industry and the distribution network before we get down to the land use issues. So I don't have a suggestion as to how to do that, but I think that has to come first.
That's a good point, Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just think that it's really important, regardless of the fact that we have a marijuana committee, produce the ordinances. I think it's really, really important that this committee spend some time reviewing it before it goes to the floor. It's really important, maybe even before the administration offers their comments, because that's why assembly committees are in place for one of the reasons, to vet ordinances before they come to the floor, so we can save a lot of time. So I think it's really important that this committee spend some time reviewing those ordinances. Thank you.
I tend to agree with you. I was thinking we were gonna look through the whole thing today, go through it and look, but I can understand the different approaches. Mr. Drainey?
I just hope this committee will take a hard look at it, because otherwise, when it comes in front of us, as chairman, I'm going to refer it back to this committee. So, I really
Do it now or do it later?
You do it now or do it later.
Let's
huh?
do it now. Because we've got to decide, okay, is residential the correct usage for this? Or multifamily, we've got to figure out where it can go. And besides power, you've got to figure out the water demands. And beyond the water demands, you've got to figure out the sewage demands to make sure we've got the right thing to make this thing work. Because there's a lot of people out there that want to see this succeed. I think I want to see it succeed, but I want to make sure we're not a negative impact on the citizens of this town.
Sure. Tyler?
Yeah, when Erica brought the issue up at the planning commission, I think I asked for if there's any kind of background that comes from, like the American Planning Association puts down narratives and things where they articles where they've looked at what the experience has been in other communities. That's the background that I'd like to familiarize myself before I get an ordinance, plunked down. And then I guess the other question for staff is, what Chris just said, 37 staff members. I mean, clearly there's a market size issue that's very different in Colorado than Anchorage, and I wonder if anyone has tried to sort of relate that, sort of relative to our market size.
There's a person in the Treasury Department who scaled down the number of retail stores in Denver based on population and concluded that Anchorage would have 48 retail stores. Now, I don't know if that's based on scaling down for population.
And I don't
that's
even
the only kind of comparison that's been done.
So we don't know on the
based
grow, on
that.
the more industrial
No.
or production side. And I guess that other piece is, do you have the decision to sort of make a local corner smoke shop or something less convenient than that and fewer of them? I mean, that, you know what I mean? If you got 48, I'm hard pressed to imagine 48 little stores, except I wonder how many smoke shops there are in town, and a lot of them, right? It seems like every strip mall's got one or two. But, that's an approach of kind of the very small little head shop style versus some sort of larger scale thing.
We've had internal discussions about limiting the number of licenses, and other communities have done that. Some communities have done it through a lottery system. There's always lawsuits, always. And B, it's difficult to determine how you would do it. I mean, if you're using a lottery system, everybody who wants in has to apply by a certain time, and then anybody after that, well, too late, you missed it, kind of thing. Plus, generally when people apply for licenses, they're talking about licensing a particular location. So if they've already spent the money to pin down, purchase, lease, whatever, a particular location, and then, oops, they don't win the lottery, we've asked them to do a substantial financial outlay that is for naught. So that's not to say that that may not be the way the community wants to go, but it's really problematic to do it in a way that is kind of fair to everybody in from the things that I've looked at.
Great, thanks.
Mr. Trini, then Mr. Evans. then
Erica,
Mr.
you said they had 37 and a half to begin with. What did they end up cutting it down to when reality hit?
No, they added 37 and a half people to
And they
deal.
needed all 37 and a half?
That's sort of mind-boggling.
This is.
I'm sorry,
this is a-
I've seen organizations before when they
Yeah.
start off with a big
Yeah.
number and then they cut down, but this sounds like they went up.
This is the number that was given, so those of us who went to Denver in January, this was the number that was given to us during a session when they had representatives from the various departments within Denver, and they talked about their kind of collaborative team approach to regulating marijuana, which was very, they had multidisciplinary inspection teams, and they said that the kind of the really good thing that came out of the marijuana legalization was that they started working, the various departments started working together more closely in establishing relationships. So that at that point in time, that snapshot in time, they said, we've added 37 and a half people across all these various departments. I have no idea whether they've fired some of them or, I don't know what's happened since then or whether they've had to add more.
We'll have to find out.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Evans?
I guess that this prompted me to, do we know yet, I'm not following us that closely, obviously, but like, for instance, if we have industrial growth or even businesses selling marijuana, is the state going to be responsible for checking to make sure that those facilities are, up to speed, or is that going to be a municipal requirement? Or is it going to be duplicated?
What do you mean by up to,
Well, you were talking about the inspection teams. I'm assuming and certainly hoping that that is going to be a state function.
the state will have certain regulations and they have enforcement officers that presumably will address their issues. We'll have some other regulations and I think our enforcement people will be responsible. We'd certainly be responsible for, compliance with building code issues.
Health department.
Yeah, so I think there'll be an element of, my guess would be there'd be an element of both.
Mr. Peterson?
Thanks, Madam Chair, and we've discussed this in the marijuana committee a couple times, and I just want to emphasize the fact that I don't believe it's a good idea to create a secondary market for the licenses, like has happened with liquor licenses and taxi cab permits. We've all been through that war. I don't think we want to go there again, and so I think we have to let the market find the level. If there's enough sales out there to support 48 retail stores, there'll be 48. If there's not, it'll be less than that. If there's more, there'll be more than that. How many convenience stores do we have in Anchorage? I always thought there was way more than was necessary, but there's one or two on every corner. So, if the money's coming in and they're paying their bills, they're going to be there.
Mr. Trainee?
Pete, on your point, look how many bars we have in Anchorage.
Too many.
The state lost control of its ability to give bar licenses out. They give a lot more than the numbers would say we should have for a town this size. But it's whatever the market's going to demand.
That's right.
I'll be right.
Fine. I think we have to base it on a market-based, situation.
I just had one more thought in answering Mr. Evans' question earlier. The state currently has 5 enforcement officers for alcohol for the entire state. I think they are adding at least 1 additional officer, but I don't think it would be, it could be difficult to depend on the state for enforcement of all of the marijuana laws just because of their budget situation and personnel.
And
Go ahead.
I think with the state's fiscal situation, they're going to punt it to the localities. That's what I'm expecting.
Mr. Still?
Yeah, it's just, common sense tells you, I think, that you start out with some number and see what the demand is and see what happens with it. But the first thing is to figure out what zoning districts things should go in and what kind of constraints or impacts they might have, and then try to address those. And you can assume everybody that the model in my mind is a liquor license aspect in terms of we've got people at the assembly that overlook things, we've got people health department, we've got people all over the place that do it. So we have to make some of those assumptions to get started, and then we can look at demand and so on and so forth. But I think we need to look at what kind of restrictions, what kind of areas should they go into and what kind of areas should they not. So, and depending upon what the activity is, I suspect that some more rural areas that have more open land might be doing more of the grow operations. Would certainly have some, I suspect, but this is going to be a consumer demand space as opposed to grow.
Ms. Gray Jackson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Anybody from the state here? Okay, great. I think we can look forward, to the state, okay, having the responsibility of enforcement, but getting reimbursed or requesting reimbursement from communities, in particular Anchorage. I think we can count on that. That's my two cents. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Trainee?
Just that because we've got the ABC board, whose director is also the one from the Marijuana Control Board, we're gonna have a fight going on between the alcohol industry and the marijuana industry, because they're both drugs. Decide which your flavor is you wanna use, but they're both drugs. And there's gonna be a big fight between liquor industry and the marijuana industry as to where they can be located at. So we're in for an interesting time.
Maybe liquor stores sell.
They can't, by state law.
One interesting opportunity we might have, I think many of us that sit on the marijuana committee also sit on this committee, but we might consider having a joint meeting with, just in case we're missing somebody, because I know Ernie's on both.
A joint meeting, is that the correct phrase?
Nice.
Good.
She finally got that one.
I'm a little slow. No blonde jokes, please.
I think Mr. Honeman's on the marijuana committee.
Okay,
And Ernie.
is he? I'm trying to think of who else is on it.
I go to both of you, though. I know.
Mr. Hall, yeah, Mr. Hall's on both. So we may have a combined meeting of both when we review it, because a lot of the questions that we're discussing right now, to some degree, many members on that committee will have opinions as far as zoning districts and whatnot. Another thing I think we're gonna, I can think of my colleague from Eagle River who's very passionate about alcohol advertising. So one of the things we're really gonna have to think about is exterior advertising for marijuana. Because, when you look around in the lower 48, I know some of the controversy has come with, all these, everything, huge marijuana leaves and everything, I don't know, dancing buds, I don't know. But I know when it comes up, oftentimes, when new establishments are being proposed, a lot of scrutiny is given to exterior advertising of that substance. So I think that's another thing that we're gonna have to talk about. And I've heard rumors that a lot of these operations are very, they smell, they give off odors, so exhaust, all these type of different things are gonna have to be addressed somehow. Mr. Trainee.
Erica, when you were down there in Colorado, I saw some stuff you guys brought back with you. They showed Santa Claus with a bag of marijuana in his back, and that was publicly put out. And that's one of the other problems with the edibles is they're gonna go after the entire younger market, even though they say they won't. They will. It's capitalism at its worst.
We saw examples of a lot of print advertising that were put into various papers and stuff like that. And, I would recommend talking to our legal department about whether, I know that there are certain restrictions that have been upheld about, I think, the alcohol or the tobacco industry advertising in, periodicals or whatever that are, where more than 30% of the readership is children, stuff like that. It's not really something I know a lot about, but I think the Department of Law should be weighing in on, what kind of restrictions we can place on that just for First Amendment reasons.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, it all leads to where's that line? I know with alcohol you can't. There's certain restrictions we have with exterior advertising. I wasn't thinking about print, but again, that's why we have these discussions. So I think when Mr. Hall and Ms. Johnston get back, I think Mr. Hall will be back on Monday, I think. But I'll call him today and see. I think it would be a good discussion. Do you think the administration would be okay with us bringing the ordinance? Well,
Actually, can I
Yeah, go
interject
ahead.
first? In order to most effectively manage staff time and deliver the committee the questions and answers that you're looking for, and first I'll turn to both Jerry and Erica before I hand it back over to you. I think it'd be helpful for us to get a sense of what are the outstanding issues, et cetera, that you would like to have addressed and answered so that we can formulate a work plan to provide those answers. And this is the point where I turn it over to you guys. Is that something that would be acceptable? You've already done a lot of work looking at it and a lot of different possible scenarios depending on what regulations actually the city chooses to adopt.
Well, February is coming up. So it's coming up pretty soon. State needs to finish up with what they're working on. We've shared some of our thoughts with Suzanne and Ethan. You've talked about a lot of those issues here today. You have, as the legislative body, have decisions to make with respect to the various land use issues. We, I believe, looked at the Colorado model, and we're going to treat our ordinance similarly as to whether, because they very strictly control the plants. They have IDs for each individual plant. They have criteria as to growing and selling in locations that highly regulate. So I'm assuming when the state is finished with their regulations, that those plants will be highly regulated as well. We had Phil Steyer here earlier, who really should come back, and perhaps MTA and MLMP to talk about the electrical needs, because that is a significant part. Some of these structures, from a building site, the building code will be able to deal with whether they're adequately can handle that, because a lot of time, what Phil said before was that a lot of the structures out in the valley really aren't constructed that well to be able to handle sufficient size of electric use. But they're not going to be grown. I don't think they're going to be grown outside, Tim. I think the majority of them are going to be grown in greenhouses and perhaps rural areas. So I think fundamentally, from a land use perspective, what we've looked at is just generally that the grow would be in industrial areas. They have three-phase power for quite the majority of those properties. They should have access to three-phase and be able to get it if they don't. But we're not going to have that big a market here either, as Colorado, Washington State did. Very confined. We don't have people going across state lines. So on the retail side, I think you should just decide where you don't want it to be sold. And some of the communities have prohibited in the CBD for tourism issues.
Prohibited where?
I think the market will drive it, and I think the market should drive it. If we have 40 some odd retail stores and they're regulated by conditional use criteria, staff can certainly put that together, but we need to get into the edibles and those other issues.
Okay, I have a little list going. Mr. Trainee, then Mr. Evans.
Just as we invite the power companies, I want to make sure MEA is brought into this, since I intend to have marijuana cultivation only in your area.
Thank
They
you,
provide
Mr.
the power.
Trainee. Thank you, Mr. Trainee.
But seriously, MEA is going to be impacted by this, because you take the grow operations, either here, the processing will be here, but I think the grow operation up to Matsu. So they need to be brought into this to make sure they've got the available power to the different things that are done.
But one of the things, we've mentioned it before, but Mr. Trainee and I went out to MEA's board meeting not too long ago, and
We got their attention.
We get their attention. We have industrial land in the Birchwood, Shugiak area, and we ran into an issue where this industrial land didn't have three-phase power. Basically, it stopped on the side of the railroad tracks right before where the industrial land was. So MEA is looking at potentially changing their capital improvement plan, and especially with marijuana coming into the municipality of Anchorage. So I expect you'll see them there at the industrial land presentation, because this is something that was brought to their attention, and they want to respond accordingly. So they're definitely coming to the table. Mr.
One other thing, I'll shut up, promise. You can take a look at the port. What are we, 80% of everything in Alaska comes to the port of Anchorage? We may not be shipping interstate from Anchorage, but I guarantee the rest of the state, their marijuana is going to come out of Anchorage. As far as processing will happen here, it'll be distributed to the bush. That's just what's going to happen. It happens to alcohol now. It'll happen with marijuana.
But it's a federal crime to put it on an airplane.
Yeah, so in some cases alcohol, but they still ship it, don't they?
Mr. Evans?
Yes, since I'm in the business of just ticking off everybody these days, I just
You
wanna-
read your email, huh?
Yeah, a few. I do want to revisit the issue of we can always opt out. We.
I'll let you take the lead on that this time.
Well, yeah, and like I said, a few more angry people, it doesn't make much difference, but, and I don't know the contours of that, what that opt-out allows us to do, but if we are able to, I think we should seriously at least look at the possibility of opting out to the extent of production and any kind of processing and only allow retail in Anchorage. Actually reverse the situation you're talking about. If people want to have grow operations in the valley and the Kenai and do those sort of things, we'll have facilities in Anchorage that you can buy them in, which is I think all the people care about anyway. They don't necessarily care where it's grown. We take off the table all the regulations that have to go, all the power issues that have to go with that, all the enforcement and all the expense that goes with that, and we just satisfy our the people that support this by having regulated stores for it. But I don't know if the opt-out gives us the ability to opt out of that portion of it, but I certainly would explore it because I think that's probably a better approach.
Interesting. Mr. Peterson, then Tyler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to go back to a second about the sign situation. We're actually working on a sign ordinance right now, so we probably should keep in the back of our mind when we're looking at this ordinance, how is this ordinance going to affect marijuana signage?
I think we would put sign-specific limitations within the use-specific standards for a marijuana retail store. So saying, notwithstanding the sign regulations in Chapter 11, retail stores are limited to this type of signage, or you can't have, you can't have window, posters or that sort of thing.
And also, so what other types of advertising are we going to limit? Are we not going to allow them on radio advertising or TV advertising or internet advertising
That's
or
what it's hard.
planes
I
flying
saw
over
TV
with banners
already.
behind them? I mean,
So you saw that one last week.
I thought it said Geico.
Don't worry about it.
And the other thing I want to talk about, the power, when Chugach Electric was here, I asked him, do we have excess capacity? Yeah, they have quite a bit of capacity, and ML&P is going to be opening that new plant soon, so we'll have additional capacity. I don't think the problem is whether we have enough electric to grow the stuff. The problem is, are we going to centralize it, the grow operations in industrialized areas? Then you are probably going to need to build out some more electric lines to that area. The current situation, we in Alaska are a little bit different than Washington or Colorado. And part of that is because of the Raven versus Alaska case, which happened back in '75, which legalized personal use here in Alaska. And so even though it's technically not been legal to transport it or to grow it, somebody had to do it because people have been using it for 40 years or more. And they're growing it in subdivisions now. I had a guy tell me after our last marijuana committee that he plugs his grow operation into the place where your washer and dryer gets plugged into. That one plug that's got the 3 different prongs on it or whatever. And so, we would not have to build out, or the electric companies wouldn't have to build out another, bunch of lines to feed industrialized areas. And part of the reason that people, that I've been told, have voted to legalize it is, the people in subdivisions have been growing it for 40 or 50 years or whatever it is. And and I've also had people tell me, I don't want them growing in my neighborhood. Well, they've already been growing in your neighborhood for 40 years and you don't know it. And so I know I'm probably out on a limb on this compared to most everyone else, but I think there's lots of reasons, and another reason is to try to get some of these guys that have been underground to come out in the open and become legitimate private small business people, so that they'll pay the tax, they'll hire employees, et cetera, et cetera. we're not gonna be collecting millions and millions of dollars in taxes if we still have a huge, gigantic underground black market, you know? So we have to keep that in the back of our mind too.
Tyler?
I maybe kind of piggyback some of what Pete was just saying, but it was interesting when Jerry said, some communities have tried to keep it out of the downtown because of the tourist industry. I mean, I wonder if anyone turns that around and says, is there a positive relationship between tourism and this industry? A long time ago, but I've been to Amsterdam, and people seem to go there for a certain reason, and it was very district specific, as I recall in my college years. A number of things were district specific in Amsterdam, and I'm not saying we replicate those, but it is interesting. I mean, we're sort of coming from a regulatory and fear base, but maybe there's opportunity. And with that, I get your point about production, but before I said no to the production, I'd want to know, are we leaving a lot of tax base out by making those decisions? Is there a negative economic impact by making that decision? And that's a very hard analysis to do when you don't have any idea what the size of the market is. But that would be, I would be interested. I would love to see some of our, I know we're going to see a presentation soon about industrial needs, but some of our industrial areas need a little bit of development, and maybe some of that is bringing some of that infrastructure in that might help other needs as well. And I just sort of laid that on the table.
Mr. Trini?
Just that the RCA, I think, controls where power can be sold by what companies. So if we can get ME to back up to the valley, ML&P has the capability of providing the power to Birchmount. That was part of our little exercise with this company, was that ML&P had the power closer, three-phase power closer than MEA did. But MEA doesn't want to give up that market. So that's going to be something we're going to have to discuss.
Mr. Steele, then Mr. Evans.
Yeah,
Okay, and Mark.
we can scale it, and we can locate things by code in various districts. I think about nurseries. We've got nurseries scattered all around up against residential districts, and although there would be a security issue, I suspect, with most of the nurseries, but I guess in my vision, it's not the massive industrial mega acreage. It's controlled warehouse or size space, and but we can help direct that by whatever we do with the codes. And we need to have this discussion, spread out a little bit more, and see what the pros and cons of it. And Mr. Evans is correct. We can limit what we want to limit, at least for a while, and then see what happens.
Erica, then Bill, and then Pete.
As you consider the kind of competing ways to go forward in terms of spreading out grows throughout, allowing people to do kind of smaller grows at their homes versus concentrating it in industrial areas, one of the things that I think needs to be considered is, are these grows going to be inspected? Are there, so if you have, 300 homes growing versus 10 warehouses, what that impact will have on the amount of staff needed to regulate this, assuming they would be inspected. And then also, would there be standards about homes that could have these grow operations? I mean, we saw some pictures in Colorado, and I don't mean to throw out scare tactics, but we saw pictures of people growing plants in their child's bedrooms. So do there need to be standards about residents having a sufficient space for a grow operation? I mean, do we want to get that detailed, or do we just want to kind of let, someone who has a 450 square foot apartment pack the whole thing with plants?
Just for clarity, when you're talking about residential grow, you're not talking about for personal use.
No,
you're
I'm
talking about
talking
for
about
commercial use.
Mr.
So I just wanna
Peterson's
make
concept of spreading
Yeah,
out.
I want to make
Yeah.
sure as you're talking, anybody who's listening online, when they hear it, they understand that
Commercial grow.
you're talking about not, because right now people can grow in their homes up to a
6.
certain amount of plants.
Yes.
Exactly. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about for commercial consumption. So, okay, who's next on this? Erica, Mr. Evans.
Yeah, I think Erica just said sort of what I was going to say, is that, as far as Pete's proposal goes, we're not going to change Raven, so even after this law is passed, people will still have the same ability to to grow for personal consumption in their house that they're doing now. That's going to be the unregulated market, and people can choose to do that if they want and not have to buy it at the store or whatever. But I think it would be a problem to try to regulate that market and also make those individuals in homes or small dwellings part of the commercial operation, simply because the logistics of trying to regulate that then would just be enormous, and the cost would outweigh any of the benefits, I think. And just with respect to Tyler's concern about the taxation, I think it's something worth looking at. But to the extent that we're talking about regulating, if we do grow operations and the whole commercial end of things or industrial end of things, regulating every single plant to the degree that they're talking about Colorado does, I think that's just more of a headache we're taking on. We may lose some dollars on it, but I don't see the whole marijuana thing being the big money boom that everybody claims it's going to be anyway, and keep it out of the black market. So that's all.
Mr. Peterson and then Mr. Trini.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I actually don't think we want to opt out of the grow phase of the business, because there's going to be a significant number of jobs available for people to be working at these warehouses, because it's a very labor-intensive business from what I've been told. And so, and we may be in an economic situation where any job is a good job, a year or two from now.
Mr. Trini? That's it. Well, another, I've been soliciting members to add things to the tickler list for items to be discussed at this committee. And one of the first ones that was presented to me by another member was revisiting the whole opportunity. We're talking about potentially this being a tourist thing and whatnot, potentially smoke clubs. Opportunities for the public. Where do they go? If they fly in and they can't go to their hotel room, they can't smoke in the park, they can't, where do they go? Currently, the current smoking ordinance has provisions in there for smoke clubs, for cigarettes and tobacco, and I know there is at least one functioning club that I know of, but for tourists, that's something that Mr. Flynn asked me to add to the list, because it's something that, I think he's probably right in that there has got to be some place where people can go if this is going to be a legal substance for them to purchase.
Well, and as a legislative body, I think it's irresponsible for us to not provide somewhere in the law for tourists to legally smoke what it's legal for them to buy. I mean, if we're going to get tax money out of it, I think we have to be responsible enough to provide some place like a smoke club or whatever you want to call it for them to buy. Because I actually think that we're going to have thousands, probably tens of thousands of tourists that are going to be here. And yeah, they're going to go to Denali and they're going to take the train to Seward, but they're going to want to try this marijuana from Alaska that they've heard so much about. And so unless we want them smoking it down in Town Square Park, which I don't think we want, I think we have to figure out some way to create the smoke club.
Mr. Trini?
So you've looked at our Tuesday agenda, because I'm dealing with smoking in Town Square. Okay. You'll see it on this week's agenda.
Well, every time I walk through there, it's impossible not to notice. So,
But seriously, I'm introducing it on Tuesday, just thought I'd tell you.
Well, I think.
But I've talked to some people in the industry, and they're already planning on weekend hotel stays where you can use marijuana. The industry's already queuing up, once that goes legal, to advertise it. Come to Alaska, spend 3 days, get potted if you want, or industry view of Denali, but it's coming.
Well, I've only seen stuff like this, and I've never been to Amsterdam, but I can only imagine.
You didn't go to college?
I did go to college, but I went to UAA. But I can only imagine there's places where you can go in and get a joint and get a brownie. I don't know.
I mean, a lot of people will choose to use edibles too. I mean, a lot of people who don't smoke who want to try it will choose to try it through the edibles, which they can do in their hotel room. Although I think you guys also make good points, because some people will choose to smoke.
Good point.
On that particular point, you know, the hotels may want to have a block of rooms that they rent as not smoke-free, but smoke with a price tag environments, because it really is going to be an issue with tourists. Where do they go? What do they do?
Well, and again, this.
There was a
this-
song in the sixties called Up on the Roof.
Up on
That's
the-
where they're going.
Well, again,
That's
this
only
is-
at the PA.
That's a good tune.
I think one of the conversations we need to have when we start talking about this is we need to look at the smoke ordinance that's there now too, and there's gotta be parity. I mean, hey, I'm not gonna say I'm fine with this, but at the same time, I think there has to be parity in law. And so I think that's part of the conversation we have to look at and see how that's working and because there are opportunities for smoke clubs in that ordinance too, and see if there's something. So I think I was hoping to be able to go through the committee today with the draft, and I hear what Chris is saying about what are your questions and what do you want answered. And I don't think we can quite say that yet until this committee has an opportunity to understand where's the starting point.
Well, and it might make more sense for us to put together the questions that we need answers for.
There we go.
That would be helpful too. So I think I think the best way forward is honestly to invite whatever members of the marijuana committee want to come to our meeting where we discuss this. That way, as their concerns are being raised and we're being mindful of that, we have an opportunity. But I do want to sit down with the rough draft and just look at it. So this committee has a starting point. So I will ask the chair of that committee, which is Mr. Hall, to potentially have a joint, I said it again, a combined meeting of both this committee and that committee on the September 2nd. So that will be our September 2nd meeting. I expect I'll have a very detailed agenda to go through. I'll invite the power companies to come and potentially talk about their need for power. Yes.
Probably ARU as well.
Oh, good.
Might be a good idea.
And I will I'll go through with Ernie and Erica and talk about potentially who we need to talk to, and Chris. Maybe we will have somebody from maybe the Department of Law or
I was
somebody.
going to suggest that.
That might be helpful. So maybe the three of us can get together and kind of go down, maybe four if we had Ernie, and go down and try to figure out what a good meeting agenda will look like for this, because this is something I think, Jerry's right when he says the legislative body has to start making decisions, and, February's coming up really fast.
Yeah.
So, and it's challenging. Some of us are on both committees, and so we have a little bit more of a starting point than others, but to try to get everybody up to speed. And I have to say the marijuana committee, through the Department of Law, has already started bringing forward, there's 4 ordinances right now that they asked us to bring forward. So those are in Paul's committee, you probably discussed it
Today.
yesterday, or today. So those are coming forward to, so we're moving on a rapid pace in multiple directions. And this is one, some of the big questions, are we gonna do grows, where are they gonna go, what are the needs, what are the things we have to think about? Those will all be good conversations. That might be a committee meeting though on the 2nd. We may need to have that at City Hall in room 155. I'm thinking this room got really packed last meeting, so I'm thinking it might be a little too small of a venue. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So that was, I think, a helpful discussion. I'll get that agenda for those specific details of that meeting. I probably won't be able to finish, sending out today or tomorrow, but I'll get with you guys really soon, and we'll do that. All right, Mr. Peterson, cell tower. Now, the question first is, should we call it a subcommittee or should we call it a work group, I guess? But I've asked Mr. Peterson if he would spearhead the initial draft for the potential, the cell tower policy that we're talking about implementing or coming up with. So, Mr. Peterson, you want to take it away?
Thanks, Madam Chair, and I learned probably more last week at our meeting about cell towers than I knew before. And since then, I've done some more reading, and so I probably quadrupled my knowledge on the subject since then. But I'm still just barely scratching the surface, I think. I'm not being an expert. But you know, and it's a change, and the technology's changing, the demand is changing. You know, cell phone technology is improving, so you know, I don't think it's going to be easy to write an ordinance that is not going to have to be continually adjusted, because the market's going to change, the technology is going to change, and so we're just going to have to keep pace with it. But we do have to start somewhere, and so I'm just sort of looking at what we're going to be doing as sort of an update.
Mr. Hall had called and spoke to both Pete and myself yesterday, and he really wants to be on the drafting group, whatever we would call it, for this. And then Tony has graciously agreed to be part of that too. It's nice to have, you know, a perspective from PNC too, so I think it'll be helpful. And then we are going to need somebody from the planning department to help as well. And I think Mr. Peterson, after this, you know, we're going to have a quick little work session to try to figure out some of the details. But, you know, Mr. Hall had some good ideas for, you know, trying to get together a good little work group so we can have a good first draft come out so everybody can kind of look at it and kick it around.
Can we sit around for that session coming up after this, so we get a sense of the resource need, and we can figure out how best to allocate resources to address that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the other thing I would say too is, since they're switching out me for Mr. Hall, I'm getting booted to the curb. He's not here today, but you know, he might have some suggestions too, and I think you guys talked, so you'll probably know it. So that will be a good discussion to have. And okay, so any questions or comments on cell towers? Elby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say thank you so much for bringing cell tower discussion to the surface. I mean, in every single district we have issues, and it's about time. And I'm just really pleased. And I have some thoughts, and we can talk offline about it, about the possibility of having somebody from the public sit on this committee. I think it might be a good idea, but we can talk about it offline.
Sure,
Thank you,
absolutely.
Madam Chair.
And Mr. Steele mentioned in the beginning that he saw a power pole with an antenna on it this morning.
With what?
No, it was yesterday. I was just driving by, and I don't remember where it was, but it was on a transmission tower, not on a distribution tower. But it was a 3 or 4, you know, sided regular cell tower on the top of the pole. So we at least have one in town somewhere.
Yeah, PNC. It went through PNC, didn't it?
Maybe.
I'm sorry?
It didn't go through PNC.
No, not that one.
Authorized.
Not in my time.
Yeah. So I was kind of stunned.
Well, it'll be. I think it'll be a good productive measure to embark on, because the fact is they're populating at a very quick speed across the municipality, and it doesn't matter how rural the district you put it in, people have issues, you know. And like I said, there's one on my street that we just approved, and people from a couple streets over were complaining. I mean, so were my neighbors, but you know, people are very concerned about them. So it's something, I think, if we have a measurable, this is our policy, and it's clear and it's well thought out, I think it'll help us the next 2 years. All right, did you have something? Is there anything from anybody?
Yeah, Madam Chair,
Mr. O'Day.
in listening to this conversation and the state's conversations, I think everybody's missing one very important area, that's drug enforcement.
Oh, you're back on the marijuana issue. Yep, sorry.
What I would suggest is to how to approach that. This is going to be a bag of worms, is talking to U.S. Marshal Hume at the federal building and ask for his assistance in how the city should approach approach ATF, DEA, and other federal law enforcement agencies, and how they are going to interpret the rules and regulations that the state's going to implement and the city's going to implement, and how they are going to look at that and how they will enforce it. Now, it's a federal law to transport drugs in an aircraft. There's also another institution called the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Canada. I've spoken with the agency in Whitehorse. They have great concerns about smuggling. They have a problem now, and it's only going to increase. And I would suggest, probably through Marshall Hume, who to notify or ask for assistance from the RCMP and how they are approaching it in Canada. Calgary, Edmonton, Grand Prairie, Vancouver, Ottawa, all the major cities have a significant problem. And if you think the U.S. has a problem, Canada has it 100-fold. And they're having to deal with it, and they're having a hard time. And what they're concerned about right now, especially in the Yukon, is smuggling. It's going to occur, it's occurring right now, and it's only going to increase. Because it's another supply line from the North Fork.
Are you talking about smuggling it into Alaska or from Alaska out?
Out.
Because I think it's actually coming into Alaska from
Yes,
Canada
it
now.
is. Yes, it is. It's going to be both ways.
But I've also read about some parts in rural Canada where usage is 50 to 60% of the population.
You got in the Nunavut and remote places, it's virtually 100%. They have similar rules that we have, and we're trying to combat it. But their major problem, is just like our rural parts of the state, is job opportunities. You have job opportunities, drug use goes down. No job opportunities, drug use goes up. It's a very complicated situation. As you know, our border is very open on this side. On the other side, it's not quite so open, but it's open. They have significant problems with customs. And it's just food for thought, because, and then the odor from the facilities, I would suggest calling EPA and how they handle theirs, what they look at, parts per million, blah, 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 blah. There was an incident, I believe out of San Francisco. The guy was, he's a Japanese individual who makes hot sauce. And the smell was traveling to subdivisions, and they were complaining about it. They complained to the EPA, and he had to install over $1 million worth of air purification systems to counteract it. So it's just, you're talking about the tip of the iceberg. Everybody knows, like Pete said, there's a significant amount of home use, home production, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How an APD needs to be here, fire department needs to be here. So when they go to a fire in a facility, they gotta know what they're up against. What's in that facility, is there any hazardous materials, et cetera, et cetera. I don't wanna see a fireman injured, killed by inhaling a substance. Same with APD. You're putting potentially enforcement people in harm's way without the right regulations or
Right training.
Mr. Weddleton, did you have a comment? Alrighty, did you have anything? Alright, well, okay, going on to then old business. just so everyone is aware, the final industrial land study work session was scheduled. It's a meeting of the whole assembly, or a work session whole. The 21st, which is Friday at 11 a.m., room 155 in City Hall. So I know last time they presented, we had asked them specifically questions regarding potential marijuana impacts in that industry, and it sounds like they've done some more research and they're going to have some information for us. And then the committee work mission statement. We still have not solidified that, but this morning I sent a very quick one, and I tend to be simple. I'm trying to find it here. But my thought was something to this effect. Essentially, the committee's charge is to evaluate and make recommendations on municipal code and processes to encourage efficient government, responsible development, and economic growth.
Awesome.
It's pretty straightforward. I don't know if anybody needs to see it in print. You know, I'm very visual, but to me it's very broad, and I did that on purpose because I'm opinionated. And, you know, whether we're talking about development or we're talking about potential tax abatements to encourage development or whatnot, I think those are all things that are intertwined, and I think that was the charge of this committee, is to look at. Does anybody have any comments, or can you make it better? No?
Send it to Barbara.
Alrighty then, well that was a lot easier. I don't know why it was on our agenda 3 times, that was easy. Okay, the last thing I'm very excited to announce, I don't know if anybody has seen it, but it's in its infancy, but we do have a committee page on the municipal website. So if you go to Assembly, muni.org, and then go to Assembly, and then click on the link for committees, I intentionally had them do that rather than just put it on the front page, because as you put things under the Assembly on the front page, as they add new things, it goes down. So under committees, you can just scroll down, find our committee, and if you look at it right now, you'll see that the work session for the cell towers was on there, the PowerPoint is on there, and the letter from GCI is on there. So we can direct people to that. So I'll make sure to send out to the members of the public too that have been attending this meeting to know they can go there. My goal is to have our agendas published on there so people can see what topics are coming up, if they're interested, if they want to come and preview that, so or give their input. I think that'll be helpful. And as we move along, you know, if we get draft ordinances that we're, you know, talking about, or you know, something that we're reviewing, I'll make sure to try to publish those on that page as well. I'm trying to be very proactive and get people information before meetings. It's a process for me, so I'm getting there though. Any comments or suggestions for things that should definitely be on there or not?
That's good.
Okay, sounds good. And so next meeting, Mr. Evans and Mr. Hall are going to work together at working on AO 2015-76 and 59. And they have solicited, or they will be soliciting input, it's my understanding, from Chris and Tyler, and I don't know who else they think is appropriate. But when Mr. Hall gets back, so the next meeting, we're expecting to be able to, which is, we have it scheduled for, might be tight considering Bill Ernie's coming back on Monday, but we have scheduled for our next assembly meeting to bring those 2 ordinances back in front of this committee and in depth discuss them and discuss what the path forward is going to be. So you guys have your work cut out for you, I'm sure. But I think we're very close, so I think it can be done. Let me know. I haven't had an opportunity yet to talk to Mr. Wheeler. Has anybody talked to him? I haven't. I'll try to get his phone number. And I'll give him a call, because if the committee is going to need him to help combine these 2 ordinances or amend either one, I think he's available to do that. So just let us know. But yeah, so if it's a success, you can sing my praises. If it's a failure, you can sing theirs. Just kidding. All right. For the next meeting, that will be what's on our agenda, and then so that's the 26th. And then the meeting of the 2nd, I'm hoping to really substantially discuss marijuana and start making, some recommendations on the path forward for some of the land use issues that we're gonna have to decide. Did you have anything, Chris?
No,
I thought you waved at me. All right.
I just waved at you.
Well, I appreciate this. This doesn't happen very often that we get done early. Mr. Evans.
Well, I'll try to prevent that then. I just want to, I saw Cheryl Richardson's concerns
yes,
about
thank
the
you.
land use funding.
I almost faced that. So, so we had a letter from Ms. Richardson about the land use plan map. And she has two interests. One is internally for us to look at what can we do to help boost public awareness of once it's out, of the land use plan map. And her suggestion is, is there some sort of PR effort that can be done? Is there any room in the budget to hire somebody to promote the fact that this is happening and that the public should pay attention to that? And so I don't have an answer for her right now.
Well, I think I misinterpreted that. She called me and her concern was that the funds were being cut, that were going to impact.
Well, there's two separate issues,
Okay,
and
that
that's
was
related to the illustrations budget. And her feeling is that the success of that plan or any work that's being done by the department is being hindered by the lack of budget for things like illustrations, et cetera. And that's an ongoing internal discussion about that. But maybe she had different messages to you and to I. But
Yeah, she indicated that she has become aware that some funds were being cut that were going to impact the ability of the department to roll out the land use plan map on the prescribed.
So you're still on schedule.
No, those funds they were part of that 0.5% that we.
Oh,
had to
okay,
give up.
for the-
So they're gone.
This is for the illustrations. Okay.
Was it just that, or was there more? Was that the only thing you lost?
No, we
money?
had to give that or more. We had to give up 0.5%, and that was for this year. Our non-labor budget is pretty
So,
there's not much in there.
yeah. So I guess the question I have is that affecting what we've seen as the plan for rolling out the land use plan map?
Draft.
Does it affect the timeline?
Yes, sir.
I don't believe it affects the timeline.
It with the illustrations, it would be a far better product, and
Okay.
it makes those choices.
So when we're talking 0.5%, or what monetary value are we talking specifically?
It wasn't. I think that was probably $2,200.
$2,200.
That's cash.
That was
Past the
more
hat.
than that. That sound about right?
I'll just write a check out.
There you go.
I
Tyler?
was just gonna say that for all of these things that are planning and community related that have a public process element to them, the timeline isn't what we set out with. The timeline is what happens once it goes through the public process, and if it's not adequately done or communicated, that's when we end up in backtracking for these 21 years, right? And so I think that's the fear, that we can all aspire to whatever the timeline is on the plan map. But if it's not communicated well, if people don't understand what it is, if the impacts aren't really laid out and done in an effective way, then it'll get through planning and zoning, it'll get to you, and then it'll bog down, and then we'll be right back to where we started. So I think we all know that, but it's worth, we see it again and again, and we don't seem to learn the lesson.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mr. Trainer, did you
Just,
have that?
Cheryl, can you get on the computer and donate money for this cause? Go to the website, and I've listened to her over the years.
Yeah.
Please step up to the plate and donate some money.
Well, and I think, especially with something like this, once we start developing it and it's a draft for circulation, the planning department's very good about, getting into the FCC and getting it through the community councils and all those things. And I think that's effective. And if we can highlight it potentially in the press, that will be helpful too. But we have to be clear of what it is and what it means and what those impacts are. And if we're not doing that, the press isn't going to cover it because they don't understand it. So I think Tyler's 100% right. It's how we roll it out and what weight we give it, I think will help drive the conversation. So I'll try to do my part. Mr. Peterson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And Jerry, when you're saying illustrations, are you talking about the color-coded map that makes it easy to get you know, an idea of what we're seeing?
They were illustrations to help better understand the map itself. Without the illustrations, it would take a little more analysis to really figure that out. It would just simplify the map. And, we're looking at that now to see if there's something else we can change for that 0.5%. And we're going to look at that today. So that money may be there. I'm just not sure. It just depends on what's happened in the last 30 days since we gave that up.
Well, and I think we, Madam Chair, would probably like that to be as user-friendly as possible, so, in my opinion.
I think so. The one thing, I've been kind of pushy on is I really want to see a land use plan done. I think it's just critical, I can't say it enough. I think it's critical to us being successful in developing all these other policies moving forward. Maybe it's because I'm very visual and that helped me wrap my mind around it. But is there anything that anybody has thought about that you think should be added to the tickler list or potentially moved up, Mr. Train?
Animal control facility licenses,
I you told me that.
I want that, we need something to address when somebody gets a facility license. There's no limit how many dogs or animals they can have. And you may think, well, over 3 you need a license, but there's no upper limit. They can have 30. And I think we need to go to a system that different steps and increments, because Elvin and I have some calls all the time from people. Why does my neighbor have 10 dogs? Well, they got a facility license. Well, is really 10 the amount they should have, or should it be at 5, or what's the limit?
Let's cap it at 200.
In your
That's a
area,
good
I'm more than
idea.
happy to. But it's something we need to take a look at, because it should be tied into land use.
There's Golden View.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm thinking Eagle River, unlimited.
we have a lot of dog teams out there. We mush out there, so
There you go.
that
We have a
dogs
dog
don't
team.
scare me. I like
All
dogs.
right.
You don't like dog bark, you don't like dogs.
Yeah.
That's another issue.
Well, and I'm looking for my notes, and I'm not finding them, but Miss Grace Jackson had a couple items that I thought would be good to add to the list. Do you remember what those were?
I think that the big one was the cell tower issue and then the animal control issue.
I'll look at my notes. I know that, I'm feeling
There was
like
one
there's
other, okay.
one more thing. I'll find it, because I was at a different meeting there.
Roger.
Mr. Weaver.
Mr. Richardson actually talked to me last week and said that you had additional conversation, they were gonna put possibly 2 citizens on this committee as well. Is that-
We'll talk offline, yeah.
Okay.
She sent me the names of a couple people that would be valuable to the conversation. And I was gonna extend invitations to them to attend the meetings. So, yeah. I think, the names she gave me, one was Art Isham, and the other is escaping me. It was a female, that, but we'll catch up. I think it's helpful to have, some people that can give perspective, the history of things is helpful to have to me, and I think that's what she was communicating, as those people had been part of the process for a long time.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So just to remind folks, the things we're dealing with is cell towers right now, and obviously marijuana. Those are the 2 big things in the land use plan. Another issue that will be coming, and I think specifically in my area, it's already been an issue, but power substations we're starting to see them be located in residential areas now more and more. So I think that will be an issue. Improving public notice, and I've explained it before that, especially when the Montefiore discussion came up, there were some people that were very close to the area that didn't feel that there was adequate notice, so it's just something to talk about and see if there's ways to improve it. Speaking of Montefiores, that's an area that we're going to have to talk about. And where do you put them? How do you deal with them? Should they be lined? Should they not be lined? Everything's going in Eagle River. I don't know why you guys keep pushing it. We already have the landfill, so.
Yeah, but we don't have the drunks out there, and I'm
Well,
sure
that's not true.
the Pat's gonna be happy
Yeah,
to exchange with you.
that's not true. I was gonna say, we're even seeing homeless and inebriate issues out in Eagle River. Mr. Hall is talking about sidewalks. He wants to bring up this discussion about that. And I don't know, is there anything in the Girdwood chapter that needs to be addressed?
There's a lot in the Girdwood chapter that needs to be addressed. It was adopted in 2005 before, you know, that's 7 more years of work that was done on the main code, and so there's a lot of things that just don't mesh. But we've kind of been waiting to do a wholesale revision to it until the Girdwood area plan is updated, because that's from 1995.
Okay.
So that was kind of what we had been thinking. I think that update may start next year.
Plan is for next year to start, depending on resources.
Which you thought
But-
was your area.
Yeah,
But
sure.
I was talking
there are
about
many
something
things
else.
that need to be addressed in chapter 9.
All right, so I know definitely, I'm gonna start working, you know, hard and heavy on chapter 10, and I'm gonna work with, the Eagle River Board of Supervisors and the community councils out there, just try to start that discussion. But with chapter 9, I would prefer the members from that area to take the lead on that, and maybe work with the Girdwood Board of Supervisors potentially.
Sure.
Is that what you're thinking? So, you know, I don't know what your time frame will be on that, you'll let me know.
I didn't even know there was an issue until a minute ago, but.
Yeah. So, I was gonna say, well, essentially with chapter 10, essentially we drafted it and we said, okay, there's a whole bunch we have to do to it, and we have to add things so we can basically reflect our unique characteristics. But whatever it doesn't say, basically the rest of Title 21 will apply, so if there's issues.
Sure. I had 2 other issues to add to your list,
Yep.
and it doesn't have to be anytime real soon, but I think we should explore the state of tax increment financing in Alaska. I think it's a vehicle that, if we can use, would be very beneficial. I understand there's state enabling legislation, but there's a concern over the legality. I think we just need to work through that and then figure out a way to start using it. The other issue is the building codes themselves. I understand that those are somewhere in the process of coming forward, and I think it might be beneficial if we have this committee take a look at that issue and invite some of the industry in before we take it all the way to the assembly.
I think that's a great idea. And, you know, I've started to, and I think I may have told you about this before, but over the last few months, I've been working with Assembly Council, and I've been working with the Governor's Office and some state legislators on potential, when you say TIF, we're right in that realm, that's where we're going. And we're talking about some of that. There's some state law that's gonna have to be changed to be as economically viable as I think it should be. But I have a couple of legislators that are interested in helping. But those are all conversations. I think if I could get a packet together, it's super complicated, you can imagine. But if I could get a packet together, and maybe even a draft, I might be able to bring it before the committee before I introduce it. But it's been something we've been working on for a long time, and there's people far smarter than I am that understand it better and can explain it better. But I think that would be that would be a topic right for this committee, I think. So I think, yeah, a lot of us are thinking in the same direction on that. So that's a good one. I'll talk to Julia and see. She's out the entire month of October. So I'll talk to her and see. That's budget season anyway, so it's a little complicated for that. But I know the changes to state law will have to be introduced prior to session in January, so we'll see what we get. All right, anything else anybody can think of? Do you have any issues, Tony, that you can think of? And Tyler, anything? Pete?
I'm good.
Chris?
Thank you.
Mr. Steele?
We'll see. I mean, there's always stuff coming up, so there will always be more.
Well, yeah, if you have it, just shoot it my way. Mr. Traney, I just laugh, I'll just say it just because it's on my mind, but he brings up animal control facilities, and one of the very first issues that came up when I was elected to the assembly was pet alligators. You remember? Albie and I've actually had multiple discussions with Representative Royberg, who's potentially looking at changing state code to address it, but, you know, there's issues until they come up. I know.
I'm
And
not
of course,
giving mine up, I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah, right. Of
They have a
course.
little free coke for Alaska's version.
Try my
I
alligator
can,
from
I
my
can
cold
tell
dead
from
hands.
first-hand experience, they taste like chicken. So,
Gator's good.
yeah. So,
Especially with barbecue.
please, if you hear conversations or concerns coming up from the public, or if you have an idea of something that you just come across that you see that needs to be discussed or improved, just send the idea my way and I'll add it to the tickler. So right now we'll do that. I think one of the things that I'm going to probably move up, unless anybody's opposed to it, I think one of the next topics, we have marijuana, obviously, which is a huge one. We have the sign ordinance in the works. We have Mr. Evans, Mr. Hall's ordinances that we're working through. But I think then the next discussion might be on power substations. So I'm going to kind of, Mr. Steele.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we need to keep in mind the workload of
Oh, I know.
these folks too.
Well, I know. And, you know, I agree to chair this committee, provided we could get things done. And so that's, you know, obviously we're hampered by their ability to assist us and our ability to actually do the work. We have too many things. That's why I'm just kind of putting it on people's radar that these are the topics that I'm starting to percolate to the top. And if something becomes more important, we can definitely change it. So, and you guys will start seeing stuff for Chapter 10 prior to the end of the year is my expectation. So there's going to be a lot to do. And I hope future meetings are more productive. I hope this is productive today. But for now, we will adjourn, and then the cell tower work group is going to meet right after this. So if you want to stick around, you can. And if you don't want to, you don't have to. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.